Welcome to Gemara Academy. In this class, we will learn Tosfos Divrei Maschil Ovel Amayla Meyud Divrei Akol Pater. Let's begin by looking at the flowchart of the Gemara so we can see what Tosfos is coming to explain. So here in the Gemara, we said that there are two ways of understanding the machlekes between Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim. Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim argue in a case where an individual threw an item from one Rosh Hashanah to another Rosh Hashanah, and there was a Rosh Hashanah in between. Rabbi Akiva says Chayiv, and the Chachamim said that he's Pater. So the Gemara said there's two ways of understanding the machlekes, and one of them is that they're arguing when the item was thrown within 10 tefachim. And the argument is, Rabbi Akiva says he's chayav because Amrinon Kluto Kamisha Chadamya. We say when an item is contained in the ear of a rishus, it's as if it's resting in that rishus. And therefore, since the item was thrown within 10 tefachim, up to 10 tefachim, it's still the rishus harabim. Therefore, when it passed through the rishus harabim, and we say Kluto Kamisha Chadamya, it's as if it's resting there, the person has done the malacha of Eitzah and he's chayav. However, the Chachamim say that he's pater, and the reason is because we don't say when the item went through the Rosh Hashanah it was as if it's resting there, and since it never came to rest in Rosh Hashanah, there was no malacha of Eitzah, and he's pater. The Gemara finishes off and says that according to this explanation that they're arguing within 10 tefachim about Kluto, we're going to say that above 10 tefachim, everybody agrees that it's pater. Everybody agrees that it's pater, and the reason is because lo yalfinon zerik mi moishit. What that means is that Moishit in the Mishkan was performed, or that is that they passed beams from one wagon to another wagon, and the wagons were Rosh Hashanah, and there was a gap of Rosh Hashanah in between. From that we learned that it's a malacha on Shabbos to pass an item from one Rosh Hashanah to another Rosh Hashanah when there's a Rosh Hashanah in between. So if they both say that it's pater when the person threw the item from one Rosh Hashanah to another with a Rosh Hashanah in between, we must say that it's because they say Lo yalfinon zerik mi Moishit. We don't learn zerik from Moishit. Moishit passing in such a manner is chayiv, and since lo yalfinon zerik mi Moishit, we don't learn throwing from passing, so passing and throwing in such a manner is going to be pater. So that's the part of the Gemara that Tosfos is going to be focusing on. So the general outline of Tosfos is we have this interpretation that the Gemara gave to understand the machlokes between Rabbi Akiva and Chachamim, that they're arguing within 10 tefachim, they're arguing about Kluta, and according to this, we're going to say that above 10 tefachim, they're not arguing, they both agree that it's pater, and the reason is because lo yalfinon zerik mi Moishit. Tosfos is going to discuss whether we can prove from here that Moishit is chayiv not just above 10 tefachim, but also within 10 tefachim. Let's see how Tosfos attempts to prove this, and then shows us that we can't. So let's see it in the flowchart form. The Gemara presented one of the ways of interpreting the machlekes between Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim, that it's within 10 tefachim, and they're arguing about Kluta. And however, according to this, we're going to say that above 10 tefachim, they both agree that it's pater, because lo yalfinon zerik mi Moishit. It says Tosfos, and it's in a green bubble, because he's coming to an understanding, a conclusion, based on this Gemara. And that is that we can prove from here, it seems like we could prove from here a little bit, that Moishit is chayiv even within 10 tefachim. How do we see that Moishit is chayiv even within 10 tefachim? So Tosfos is going to prove it. It's going to come up in a blue arrow. That's the proof. Tosfos is going to prove it as follows. He's going to show us that if we say that it's pater, it's going to be a problem. If we say Moishit is pater, that'll create a problem. Therefore, we must say that it's chayiv. So the proof to show that it's chayiv is going to be that if we learn that it's pater, there's a problem with our Gemara. And if we say that it's chayiv, that problem is removed. So clearly, from our Gemara, we see that Moishit within 10 tefachim is not pater, rather it's chayiv. So let's see what will happen if we say it's pater. Says Tosfos, if we were to say that it's pater, and what would be the basis to say it's pater? Because it wasn't done that way in the Mishkan. In the Mishkan, they passed items from one wagon to the next. The wagons were higher than 10 tefachim, so only above 10 tefachim is Moishit chayiv. However, within 10 tefachim, it's going to be pater. Says Tosfos, if we were to say this, there's a problem with our Gemara. Why did we say that if they're arguing within 10 tefachim about Kluta, then it'll come out that above 10 tefachim, everybody agrees that a person is pater because lo yalfinon zerik mi Moishit, because we don't learn zerik from Moishit. Why didn't the Gemara conclude and say that if they're arguing within 10 tefachim about Kluta, above 10 tefachim, they both agree that it's chayiv, because we do learn zerik from Moishit? Why isn't that a possible interpretation? Presented as another way. We could say above, they both say pater, because we don't learn zerik from Moishit, or maybe they both say chayiv, because we do learn zerik from Moishit. The Gemara says, no, it must be that above 10 tefachim, they both say pater, because we don't learn zerik from Moishit. Why? So we have a question now. However, if we say that Moishit is chayiv within 10 tefachim, that question is removed. Let's see how. If we're going to say that Moishit is chayiv above 10 tefachim and within 10 tefachim, now we understand the Gemara could never have said that they're arguing within 10 tefachim about Kluta, and above 10 tefachim, everybody agrees it's chayiv because we learn zerik from Moishit. If we learn zerik from Moishit, and Moishit is chayiv above 10 tefachim and within 10 tefachim, they wouldn't be arguing within 10 tefachim. They don't agree it's chayiv. since Yalfinan Zerik Mimeshit, we learned throwing from passing, so throwing would be chayiv. There wouldn't have been an argument. So now it makes sense. That's why the Gemara was forced to say that if they're arguing within 10 tefachim, it must be that they hold above 10 tefachim it's pater, because lo Yalfinan Zerik Mimeshit. So this is Tosfos' conclusion that he wants to come to, and the proof that it's based on. We'll present it now in a chart form. It'll help us with understanding as well as with the questions Tosfos brings out on his proof. So the building blocks of Tosfos is we have two conclusions and two proofs. Conclusion number one is that if Moishit within 10 tefachim is pater, if we were to say that it's pater, then we have a problem with our Gemara. What's the problem with our Gemara? We just mentioned it. That if it's pater, why didn't we say that they're arguing within 10 tefachim baklota, and above 10 tefachim everybody agrees it's chayiv because we learned zerik from Moishit. So that means that we'll have a problem. However, the second conclusion is, if we say that Moishit passing within 10 tefachim is chayiv, then it all makes sense. Why does it all make sense? Because now we cannot say, if it's chayiv even within 10 tefachim, we can't say that above 10 tefachim everybody says chayiv, because if they both say chayiv, then they wouldn't be arguing within 10 tefachim. We cannot, if it's going to be chayiv within 10 tefachim, everything makes sense. It's chayiv within 10 tefachim, and the reason why we don't say above 10 tefachim, everybody agrees it's chayiv, because we learn zerik from Moishit, because then if we learn zerik from Moishit, they would also learn zerik from Moishit within 10 tefachim, and they wouldn't be arguing. Tosfos is going to show us how both of these proofs are incorrect, and therefore both conclusions are also incorrect. Let's see. Tosfos says the whole proof is built on, which is the first point in the chart. The whole proof is built on a question. The question is, why didn't we say that they're arguing within 10 tefachim? However, above 10 tefachim, they both agree that it's chayev because we learn zerik from Moishit. And Tosfos therefore wanted to conclude that we're unable to learn zerik from Moishit because Moishit is also chayev within, and therefore they wouldn't be able to be arguing within 10 tefachim. Says Tosfos, stop. It stops much. The issue with saying that they both say chayev and Yalfin and zerik Moishit is totally unrelated to the discussion at hand. There's an external outside reason that doesn't allow us to. And the reason is there is a Mishnah on Perek HaZerik that says, Lo Yalfinon Zerik Mimeshit. We don't learn Zerik from Meshit. Now, if we were going to say that everybody holds Yalfinon Zerik Mimeshit, who's going to be the author of that Mishnah? So therefore it comes out that when we ask the question, we're able to stop ourselves a lot quicker before we come to conclusions. So let's see the question and stop ourselves quicker. The question is, why didn't we finish off and say that above 10 tefachim, everybody says chayiv because we learned zerik from Moishit? The answer is because we can't. Because there's an opinion out there that says we don't learn zerik from Moishit. And therefore we can't say everybody says we do, because then there's no author for that opinion. Now, so it comes out that we disregarded that proof, and therefore the conclusion is also incorrect. The conclusion was, if Moishit within 10 tefachim is pater, we have a problem. Why didn't we say that everybody agrees it's chayiv? Because we can't. Because there's an opinion that says it's pater. Now we'll see how the second proof is also disregarded. It says Tosfos, we were saying that if Moishit is chayiv above and within 10 tefachim, and we learn zerik from Moishit, then there can never be an argument. Says Tosfos, that's not true. They could still be arguing within 10 tefachim. We can say that above 10 tefachim, within 10 tefachim, Moishit's chayiv, and Yalfin and zerik Moishit, and therefore above 10 tefachim and within 10 tefachim, zerik is chayiv. And Rabbi Kiva and Chachamim are still arguing. Where are they arguing? They're arguing in a case when the two Rishuyas HaYachid were on opposite sides of the street. The reason is because Moishit is only chayiv when the two Rishuyas HaYachid are on the same side of the street, just like in the Mishkan, when the wagons were lined up in a row and they passed from one to the next. They didn't pass from one row of wagons to the other row. They only passed it along the same row. And therefore we can say that above 10 tefachim they learn zerik from Moishit, and zerik's going to be chayiv, and on within 10 tefachim they say that as well. And they're still arguing in a case when it's on two sides of the street. Rabbi Kiva says, even though we don't have Moishit being chayiv here, we can't learn zerik from Moishit, there's still a chiyuv. There's a chiyuv of haitzah, because kluta kamisha huncha, it went through the Rishus Rabbim, and therefore it's as if it rested in the Rishus Rabbim, so the malach of haitzah was performed. Chachamim say that we don't, it's pater, because we don't say kluta kamisha huncha. It's not as if it ever rested in the Rishus Rabbim, and therefore there's no malacha of haitzah. Tosfos, however, concludes that, like we met, and with that we rejected the second proof. The second proof was that if we did learn zerik from Moishit, they wouldn't be able to argue. It says they still wouldn't be able to argue. Even if we learn zerik from Moishit and Moishit's chayav both above and within, they could still argue when it's on two sides of the street. Tosfos, however, concludes and says that like we mentioned earlier, for an outside reason, we're unable to say this. We're unable to say that Moishit is chayav above and within, and they both learn zerik from Moishit, and the argument is on two sides of the street. We can't say that because there's an opinion that says we don't learn zerik from Moishit. Tosfos also finishes off and says that our original question, why didn't we say that above 10 tefachim everybody agrees it's chayev because we learned Zarek from Moshe? Actually, that question can be answered in a different way as well, like he's going to explain in a later Tosfos on our Sugya. So to summarize, Tosfos originally presented a proof to show that Moshe is chayev not only above 10 tefachim but also within. And the proof is that was based on why didn't our Gemara say that they both agree above 10 tefachim that it's chayev? And Tosfos says that if Moshe is chayev within 10 tefachim, then we have an answer to that question. However, if Moshe is potter within 10 tefachim, then we don't have an answer to that question. And Tosfos rejects both those points. He says, number one, if Moshe is potter, we still have an answer to that question. And number two, if Moshe is chayev, we still don't have an answer to the question, because it could be that Moshe is chayev, and we still could have learned Zarek from Moshe above and within, and there could still be an argument when it's on two sides of the street.